Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're stepping onto a quiet terrace, a space that feels, well, almost like a blank ledger just waiting to be opened. Picture two friends, Mira and Arav, gathering for a conversation. Mira brings an old brass divider, the kind cartographers once used to mark distances on ancient maps, along with a little packet of cardamom-dusted almonds. Arav brings a seemingly mundane document, a printout of a survey form used by a local cooperative to study milk consumption patterns. It seems like a kind of odd pairing, right? But together, they're going to help us look at numbers in a completely new way. Not as cold, distant tools, but as human truths. We're going to explore how meaning is actually measured, how numbers carry a profound rhythm, and how the questions we ask can become bridges between us.
Right off the bat, let's dive into Mira's central thesis. As she places that antique brass divider onto her notebook, she totally reframes our understanding of data. She says, "I've been thinking about statistics, not just as calculation, as care, the way we hold patterns gently." That is a massive paradigm shift. Immediately, we're moving away from the idea of statistics as the sterile, detached, mathematical exercise. Instead, we're looking at it as a deeply human-centric practice, because when we measure something, when we take the time to track something, we're paying attention to it. And paying attention, that's the most fundamental form of care.
So let's move into our first major concept, the rhythm of numbers, and how we translate central tendency.
Let's see what actually happens when we look at a group of numbers and search for where human behaviors naturally gather. What's really fascinating here is the shift from strict formulas to actual feelings. Arav points out that when we look at data, we're really just looking for where it clusters. Take a local bakery tracking its daily cookie sales. If we look at the mean, the average, it doesn't just give them a rigid number, it gives them a sense of rhythm, the actual daily pulse of their business. The median, the exact middle value, well, that helps them practically plan their inventory so they don't run out. And the mode, the items sold most frequently, that's a direct measurement of what people love the most. It tells them exactly what their community craves. As Mira beautifully puts it, looking at this data wasn't just about staring at spreadsheets, it was a reflection of human desire.
But hey, knowing the center simply isn't enough, is it? Arav explains that we've got to measure how far things stray from that center, a concept called dispersion. We use the range to see the total spread of our data, the variance to see how much those values differ from our average, and standard deviation to understand our consistency. Think about a cooperative dairy. They noticed that their average milk sales were perfectly stable, but the daily variation, the dispersion, was incredibly high. Some days people needed a lot, some days very little. By understanding this dispersion, they were practically forced to completely redesign their delivery routes to ensure everyone got what they needed exactly when they needed it.
And that leads to this incredibly powerful realization for Mira. It wasn't just deviation, it was dignity. By calculating how much the daily milk needs varied, the dairy wasn't just doing math. They were acknowledging the changing, shifting realities of the real families they served, honoring those human differences, and making sure a family actually had milk for their morning routine completely transforms the statistical measurement of standard deviation into an act of preserving human dignity.
All right, moving right along to our next section, the shape of uncertainty and the language of probability.
Arav beautifully describes probability not as some rigid prediction of what will absolutely happen, but as a way to honor uncertainty by giving it structure. Let's look at how this actually plays out in the real world. Binomial distribution is for outcomes with just two possibilities. A bakery uses it to predict, will the next customer choose the new millet cookie or the regular one? Poisson distribution models rare, totally unpredictable events. A textile firm uses this math to plan for sudden machine breakdowns so their workers aren't left stranded. Normal distribution is that familiar gentle bell curve, the hill where most values naturally gather, which a school uses to compassionately understand students' scores without extreme outliers skewing the whole picture. And exponential distribution models the time between events, helping a cooperative plan for staffing gaps so their team isn't overwhelmed. You see, these aren't just abstract equations on a whiteboard. They're tangible, real-world tools for navigating a chaotic world.
Mira reflects on these distributions and concludes, probability wasn't just forecast, it was faith. Take a second to really let that poetic translation sink in. When a business or a school uses probability, they are staring into the absolute unknown. They're accepting that they literally cannot control the future, but they are trusting the structure of possibility. Embracing the unknown like that, it requires a deeply human kind of trust.
Next up, we explore data collection as exchange, or what they call the art of listening.
The crucial point here is that before we can analyze any of this data, before we calculate a single mean or map out a bell curve, we have to ask questions. Arav points out that surveys, interviews, and observations aren't just administrative chores, they're acts of deep listening. Mira adds a profound rule: data is gifted, not gathered. It's an intimate exchange. Think of a publishing house that decides to completely redesign its feedback forms. They stopped asking people to just rate books on a cold scale of 1 to 5 and started designing forms to understand how the stories actually made the readers feel. A bakery stopped just counting sales and started asking customers about taste, texture, and the memories those flavors evoked. A school used quiet observation to simply study how students naturally move through space, rather than forcing them into predetermined paths. Data collection in this light is never a cold extraction. It's a relationship.
And this brilliantly illustrates the difference in how we approach people. Think about the stark contrast between extraction and exchange. Extraction relies on closed-ended questions like, how much do you buy? It offers strict structure. Super easy to drop into a spreadsheet, right? But exchange relies on open-ended questions like, how you use milk? That invites human stories. When our cooperative dairy asked that exact open-ended question, the answers they got back were absolutely incredible. They didn't just get volumes and liters. They uncovered rich, daily rituals. They heard about chai brewed at dawn, kheer cooked for special birthdays, and curd prepared for digestion. By simply changing the question, they unlock the actual lived experience behind the product.
As Mira notes, design wasn't format, it was feeling. When you're crafting questions to ask another human being, you're engaging in a delicate art that requires clarity, kindness, and deep curiosity. The way you format your survey directly dictates the feeling the respondent experiences, and ultimately, the truthfulness of the gift they decide to give you in return.
This brings us to our final and maybe most important section: the ethics of care and holding numbers with accountability.
Because every single response represents a real human voice, the numbers must be handled with the utmost respect. We're now in that vital final phase of the data lifecycle. Arav insists that numbers must be held with care. Consent, privacy, and respect, they're not just legal checkboxes. They matter above all else. In practice, this looks like a school meticulously anonymizing student feedback so that children actually feel safe telling the truth. It looks like a bakery taking the data they collected and sharing the results openly with their staff rather than hoarding it away in some executive office. It looks like a cooperative taking their survey findings and actually inviting the farmers to sit down and interpret the meaning of those findings together. True data analysis is an inclusive, shared responsibility.
Mira brings this whole philosophical translation to its most important conclusion. She says it wasn't just analysis, it was accountability. You see, when we gather data from people, we owe them something in return. We owe them the effort to understand their context, to fiercely protect their identities, and to use the information to make their lives better, not just to optimize a system for our own gain.
So, we return to the quiet terrace. The brass divider sits perfectly still on the notebook. The cardamom almonds are pretty much gone. The space feels layered now, full of rhythm, much like a data room that has truly listened to the world. Reflecting on it all, Mira notes, statistics is not just calculation, it's care. And Arav adds, and probability is not just prediction, it's possibility. As we close out this explainer, I want to leave you with the exact reflections Mira and Arav wrote down that evening. Ask yourself, what patterns do you hold? How do you honor variation in the people around you? What questions do you ask, and why? And ultimately, how will you turn your numbers into meaning?